Great. Thank you so much, John, for
Definitely.
joining us.
Good afternoon, council members. I apologize for my tardiness. My name is John Pusho. I am Mayor Cantrell's Chief of Staff. And today we're going over a relatively high-level presentation that really discusses some changes that are being made to the board articles of incorporation, as well as the bylaws, but also is really starting the conversation about how can we do a better job of focusing on our people? How can we do a better job of focusing on some of the people who are the reason why people come to the city to enjoy the hospitality that the city provides? So just as a little bit of background, as part of Fair Share, one of the things that was discussed was that New Orleans and Company and NOTMC would change some of the roles and responsibilities of those organizations. And by that specifically, I mean that all marketing will now be done by New Orleans and Company. So whereas before it was specifically in relation to the business travel piece of marketing, they will now be doing both the recreational and the commercial portion of marketing. And also, NOTMC will be changing its name and focusing on cultural bearers and the cultural economy. So specifically in relation to the things that the council would vote on, there are some key changes to the Articles of Incorporation. The most obvious is obviously the name, but also the structure of the board. There would be, instead of 15 members, there would now be 7. 4 would be culture bearers that are chosen by the mayor. 2 would be council members specifically from districts B and C, and then there would also be an additional individual chosen by the council. Additionally, the mission and purpose is now to support the cultural economy and culture bearers of the city of New Orleans through programs and projects, and to advance, promote, and maintain tourism that is equitable and sustainable. In relation to the key changes in the bylaws, they mirror many of the changes in the Articles of Incorporation, including the change in the organization name and the removal of what was called the expenditure formula. The expenditure formula was specifically in relation to what dollars were being used on marketing, and as marketing is no longer going to be a priority or a function of the new organization, that piece is being removed from the bylaws. There are several things, however, that are staying the same, and as I mentioned on the front end, this is in many ways the beginning of the process, because there will be other aspects of the financial pieces that will need to be discussed further by the council, and that will need to be looked into, but specifically in relation to what is staying when it comes to the Articles of Incorporation and the bylaws. Open meeting laws will still apply. The Culture Fund will still have to provide an annual report to the City Council, and the Economic Development Plan that is currently required will have to be presented and approved by the City Council. So those pieces are staying. Just a brief description of some of the things that the New Orleans Tourism and Cultural Fund will support. Culture institutions and cultural producers, collaborations that create and enhance training and workforce pathways, especially in the film industry, continued investments in festivals and other cultural events that rely on support. That's obviously a function currently of what NOTMC uses much of its revenue for now, or a portion of it. A new platform that allows cultural producers to deal directly with consumers and have more control over their pricing. And then the last piece is the city's investment into our cultural economy. I think what's relevant, and I think it's been provided as a bit of background for some of the folks at the dais, and we'll have further conversations in the future. When Fair Share was discussing the local privilege tax, the initial intent was that any excess revenue from the local privilege tax that didn't cover ongoing expenses was going to be used for infrastructure. There are some limitations to the local privilege tax that prevent it from being used directly for infrastructure. And so in the context of that, one of the things that we were planning to do is look at existing city expenses that are hospitality related, that are currently paid for via general fund revenue, have some of those things potentially paid for by the local privilege tax, which would then open up general fund dollars that we could use for infrastructure. So this is an example. The Office of Cultural Economy currently gets roughly $1 million in general fund revenue to help fund that office. It also gets money from the local privilege tax. So one of the options as far as the ways that we could do this is, instead of that money coming from the general fund, that money could come directly from the local privilege tax, which would then free up the revenue on a recurring basis from the general fund that could be used for the purposes that were initially intended it for when we were discussing fair share on the front end. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a broad piece about what the vision for this investment is, and we discussed this a little bit on the beginning of the presentation. We're really trying to provide a means for investing in our people that produce the culture that is part of what makes New Orleans great. And I know that seems somewhat general on the front end. What I can tell you is, as we put the board in place and as we put in our policies and procedures, just as NOTMC now had a process for how it figured out how it was going to spend those dollars, we're going to do the same thing, and with full accountability and transparency and care, because this could really be big for the city. It's not just existing dollars, but trying to identify new potential resources too that we can get directly into the hands of the people who are part of the economy on a local level for hospitality. Because right now, as many of you already know better than I do, many of those folks do not believe that they are winning when the industry wins, and we want to make sure that they win just as the industry wins. And in order to do that, we need direct investment in those folks. So we will be looking, I think, throughout the administration for potential funding sources and different ways to figure out ways to get additional revenue to those folks through the Cultural Economy Fund. And I think that's it. With that, council members, I'm happy to answer questions. I do want to just say, again, that the specifics of what would be voted on by the council are relatively narrow in relation to the bylaws and the articles of incorporation. But we know that this is part of a broader conversation. We know that there's going to be additional conversation specifically in relation to fair share, but also other pieces that will all tie in to much of the work on this. But wanted to provide a high-level view of what these changes were about. And with that, I'd welcome any questions you might have.
Sure, John. I'd just like to make a couple comments. Especially leaving it on this slide, the vision for investment in the cultural economy. And I know that this is a step, and that when you look at, you want to provide a means for the city to invest in its resources and the people that make New Orleans special. We are all 100% in favor of that, especially when we consider a lot of our folks in our culture board might average $18,000 in annual income a year, and we have musicians and artists that can't even afford to buy a house in neighborhoods in which they grew up. And I think it's really important, if we're going to continue the viability of our tourist industry, to ensure that the people that make it are invested in. And with that, I think the council back in November 21st, passed a resolution, and it was authored by all the council members, in terms of having a sustainable tourism marketing plan that would do just that. One that would be inclusive. We asked that the New Orleans Tourism Marketing Corporation would fund this out of their 2020 budget, because we knew there was additional monies that were not that were set aside, that were not expended and not allocated for anything. And so I really feel like this dovetails nicely with what the mayor wants to do. And in fact, within our resolution, we talked about the involvement of all major interest groups that can have a stake in local sustainable tourism strategies. This includes, but not limited to, New Orleans and Company, the New Orleans Tourism Marketing Corporation, now the fund, Greater New Orleans, Inc., the New Orleans Business Alliance, the Multicultural Tourism Network, the Mayor's Office of Cultural Economy, the Arts Council of New Orleans, museums and cultural institutions, and our social aid and pleasure clubs. And so I really hope that this is part of this fund. And how do you see that fitting in, as all 7 members of the council would like to see this happen? And in fact, Greater, as you know, GNOF is involved in doing this. The New Orleans and Company would like to also match resources and money to make this a robust study, and one that's inclusive of the entire hospitality industry.
No, Councilmember, and I know we've had some conversations offline in relation to this. Making sure that we have a coherent strategy that's informed by a sustainable study, I think, makes a lot of sense. what we're just trying to figure out is a couple different pieces, how it's fully funded. So, potentially leveraging other partners, as has been discussed, to make sure that we're putting the right
Absolutely.
resources in it. But also trying to figure out the timing. And I know that there's been some conversation that time is of the essence and that we wanted to strike while the iron's hot. But I also want to make sure that in the context of some of the other things that we're doing in relation to especially city-owned assets that deal with hospitality, that all of those pieces are just moving appropriately, and that we're not studying the old stuff that we're doing, but that we're studying the things that are part of what
I don't think it's not studying the old stuff. It's being thoughtful and moving forward in the future. I don't think one is contingent upon the other. The city of New Orleans would be a participant in and help guide the study, but it's bigger than just that. It would be inclusive of all the culture bearers and the people that make this industry grow. And I would just hope, we talked about this fund has to have a plan, and I think the plan needs to be shaped by the people of the city of New Orleans.
No.
And don't we want a big, open, and inclusive process to do that?
Sure.
And then have an actual strategy that we can make sure that the fund is being appropriately invested within that industry.
No, Councilmember, that definitely makes sense. I think what I'm specifically focusing in on, though, is any part of that study is an assessment of the existing structure that we have in place. And although this is a broader piece about more than just the city assets, we do want to make sure that the plan that we put in place and that we invest in is going to be current. And so I say that all to say I think a study makes a whole lot of sense. We're trying to figure out how to make that work. And although I don't have a specific piece on it, it is something that I know is very much on the radar and is an interest that's shared by several of the council members.
Councilmember Giusso?
Thank you. Hey, I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying, John, about the money goes from general fund to cultural economy, and now that may free up that funding. Will the money that is going to cultural economy then be sent over to the infrastructure maintenance fund, earmarked for infrastructure?
So the way this will work, and Councilmember, we can provide you some more details, but the way that it would likely work is that the general fund revenue would either be spent directly on infrastructure projects, or the general fund revenue would be transferred to the infrastructure fund to then be spent on those projects.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things we'll welcome the collaboration with the city council on that piece.
Yeah, I mean, that just sounds good. And I think, obviously, if we can say to people, hey, this money is going to this, and this is where you can see it, and obviously we know the mayor's office has been promoting much more of the road work that's going on other places.
And Councilmember, whatever our process is, we need to make sure it's clear. I don't think a lot of folks, if their pothole gets fixed, care which fund it comes from, but obviously we want to make sure that our process works and is clear going forward.
And then, John, you talked a little bit about the bylaws and articles. I mean, is there sort of a set of ordinances we're going to have to work our way through, or are we going to have one or two things? I'm just trying to figure out.
Sure. Well, so there's a legislative instrument, I think, that would be specific to the articles of incorporation and the bylaws. I think there are also going to be several CEAs that are kind of already part of the overall conversation that will likely be relevant to this piece. And what I mean by that is, there's an ongoing conversation with NOCO and NOCO and the city in relation to both the STR CEA, but also an ongoing negotiation about the existing responsibilities, just clarifying what NOCO will do now versus what the city would do now. And so I think those pieces speak to it. I don't think it's necessarily like one has to happen in order for the other one to, but there's a relevance there with all of that I think will be part of the conversation. And look, and I would also say, when it comes to fair share, as you know, this is a multifaceted piece that it requires a lot of different moving parts, some of them including several CEAs, some of them specifically with Sewage and Water Board, so that there's some clarity and legality to how those dollars get spent by Sewage and Water Board. So I hope that's helpful for the answer to your question. But there are several other pieces moving down the tracks that will speak to some of this.
Thank you.
Councilmember Moreno.
Thank you. Hey, John. Hey, Josh.
Hey.
We all agree that we want, a type of sustainable tourism that at the end of the day is going to be impactful in a beneficial way to the people who live in the city and who work in the city, and particularly work in the tourism industry. So, I would just, and I know that Councilmember Palmer already brought it up, but I really do think that having some type of strategic plan kind of off the top is going to be able to set the priorities for this particular fund. I'm unclear why we can't just like move forward with executing this type of study, just because I think it would be so beneficial, and make sure that we are spending the money coming through this fund into the right priorities, and that we're not just kind of spending flimsily or whatever. Do you think that we can get that timeline expedited and get something going really immediately?
The commitment I would make to you, council members, that I'm hoping to get some specificity to you about what the timeline would be on that. You guys know the nature of my conversations with y'all is I never overpromise, and I don't want to do anything on the dais that would intimate something that I would then have to come back and crawfish on you with. We understand that this is a priority for the council.
I just really think, John, that I think that this would give real legitimacy to this particular new fund or commission, because they would be really spending their dollars based on something that has been studied and based on something that is concrete. And that's really why all 7 members of the city council unanimously supported moving forward with that study. So I would just think that this would be one of the first things that is done, and I think it would be money well spent. John, you also talked about how there's going to be different policies that are put in place by this particular group of individuals who make up this new fund. And in that, are we going to have the specific definitions of, like, I mean, we can all kind of talk in kind of big generalities as to who is a culture bearer, but to define those things a little bit more so that there are better definitions as to who exactly we're talking about and what we're talking about trying to fund?
No, I believe there's going to be some additional clarity to that. What I would say is that, and Josh, you feel free to chime in, but just as there's a somewhat broad breadth of things that NOTMC currently is able to do under the understanding of what tourism and marketing and what the functions of that piece are, I think that there's still going to be some flexibility. But having said that, I do want to make sure that you understand that we're not just going to spend the money, or that the organization, the fund, is not going to spend the money on just anything and call anything a culture bearer. But I would say that there are a lot of folks that are in that pot. And, when it comes to hospitality, there are a lot of people who contribute to that system that, frankly, right now don't feel like they're winning. And I don't want to get into a situation where we're in an arbitrary situation that says, okay, you who make $12 an hour have access to this as part of as hospitality, but you who make $12 an hour don't have access as part of hospitality because of some job function stuff. I say that broadly. I think specifically we're going to want to have some clarity just so people have an understanding of what to expect.
And Council, Madam President, what I would add is that, I think this is the function of the economic development plan that'll have to come before the council every year. It'll have to lay out what the board deems to be its priorities for spending and investing in culture bearers every year. Obviously, I understand that your point is a bit more narrow. You want, I believe.
I mean, like, what is a culture bearer? What is a cultural producer? I
Totally.
think that to define that a little bit more.
Totally, but I think what we don't want is to be in a situation where we have foreclosed opportunities for investing in things that we might not have imagined. I think the film industry is a perfect example of this. 30 years ago, I don't think anyone could have forecasted the rise of film in New Orleans. And so if there was, some policy provision that, too constrained, defined culture bearer in too constrained a way, it could have foreclosed the opportunity for us to invest in something that's actually now providing incredible job opportunities for our people. So, I do think there is a happy medium. And, I think that as the Office of Cultural Economy is able to, take over and start to, formally manage some of these pieces, that a lot of that will become more clear.
And how do you expect to kind of dole out those dollars to whenever you define the culture bearers or culture producers? Is it going to be through a grant process? Is it just through the decision of the board? How is that going
I think
to work?
part of that will be the development of that economic development plan that the council is going to have to approve. I say that because there's obviously several things that you're hearing from us because we want to do them, right? But there are also these things that are existing currently in the law because we also have to do them, right? And so the policies that are staying in place require the description of what that plan is and what dollars are used where and why. That was the case with NOTMC. That will be the case for the fund. And part of that is as we build this up.
So do you mean you're
wanted
going to
define
set
that sooner rather than
percentages to
later.
go to different entities like NOTMC had? Is that what you mean?
I mean, I think there's
Or-
the potential for
To different topics?
and yeah, I think there's a good chance that you might have a line item where for instance, that this amount of money went to this specific organization and this amount of money went to that specific organization, and then broadly, this amount of money went to fairs and festivals versus this amount of money went to the film commission. The mayor is going to want to be, especially because this is new, transparent on how those dollars get spent, because we do want to build buy-in on the front end. So, with that, there will be some specificity to where those dollars go.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the sooner the better to set those parameters as to how that money is going to be doled out. I mean, whether it's a grant process and every festival can apply, or just so that people are clear that it's not just this is a fund of however many people, 7 people who just decide who gets some money.
Right.
No, I hear you, council member, and I think part of it for us is as we try to get the thing set up as soon as possible so we can do the rest of these pieces, it's really critical that we get this online so that we can do all the things that you're asking for us to do, because they certainly make sense and they're a priority for us to get done, but we need to set up the things so we can create the strategies that folks are asking for around this stuff, because we want to.
You had said that there were limitations around, I'm sorry, one more question, around the occupancy tax.
The local privilege tax.
Yeah, the local privilege tax.
Yeah.
What are those limitations?
Sure. So broadly, what I would say is that those uses have to be for hospitality related pieces that are also tied somewhat to an economic development purpose. The language, which I do not have on me right now, essentially connects the existence of the tax with some of those purposes. And so it is our full intent to stay within the purpose of the existing tax as we dole those dollars out.
Okay, so your decision is to stay within the current parameters of the tax.
As far as uses.
As far as uses, but could that use be redirected a different way?
The limitations in the ordinance, I'd say, are pretty clear about what the dollars can and can't be used for. Josh?
Yeah, I would just say the answer is no, not without risking legal challenge. And so that's precisely why we've taken the approach that we have on this culture bearers piece.
Yeah. The only reason why I bring that up is because I've been getting like these mixed kind of opinions on that. And I believe that Mr. Swensick, he did like a quick kind of memo for us about whether or not this could be redirected or not. Adam, do you mind speaking on that?
Yes, Can you hear me?
Yes.
What I'd like to say is that this is a complex issue. As far as we know, kind of the research that we have done preliminarily is that the legal impediment or restriction on the use of this funds is the city ordinance contained in Chapter 170, 1002 et sec. And so there is a legal prohibition on NOTMC from using the proceeds of the hotel occupancy tax in a manner inconsistent with the ordinance. But from a council perspective, the council has the power to amend ordinances. And so, I want to reserve the right that I've not done an exhaustive research of all of the kind of contractual limitations and other ordinances. But as far as we can tell sitting here today, this would be a matter of the council if it sought to rededicate or repurpose the proceeds of this occupancy privilege tax. It would simply have to change the ordinance and rededicate the purpose.
So could you change the ordinance for this money to go into like the general fund or the infrastructure fund?
Yes.
Okay.
And council member, just to be clear, the legal background information that we've gotten does not necessarily jibe with that. I certainly respect Mr. Swinzig's analysis on that, but part of the reason why we've taken the approach that we have is based off of the input that we've gotten from the city attorney's office, especially because on the front end the intention was that the excess revenue that wasn't currently going to existing expenses was going to be used for infrastructure. The reason why we've had to change it and frankly look at a more complicated structure was because of legal concerns. They were not policy or political concerns.
And for the benefit of the council, I have not spoken with the city attorney's office on this, and I'm happy to interact with them, but, Mr. Puccio, this is my untutored kind of look at it, and I haven't spoken to Ms. LaBeouf or her team.
No, that would be great. If it's possible, John, if you could forward us what you've received from the city attorney, just so that we're all kind of aware of, what are the restrictions on this particular tax. Like I said, I'm just trying to figure out best uses of the money, best accountability. I certainly support, supporting our culture bearers and producers, and that is incredibly important. But, we just have to work out the details and keep working on that.
And look, in council member, I think it.
And as you know, the fair share money is incredibly important to me and the rest of the council, and that commitment.
And this goes back to the direct conversations that I know that we had about this. There was an understanding that the excess revenue was going to be used for infrastructure. It is still our commitment to make that work. The way that we believe we have to do that legally has become a bit more complicated, but the end result has not changed. Yeah. And
I appreciate that commitment. That the money that was committed for infrastructure, that you all are going to find that, some way, somehow, and make that commitment whole. So I appreciate that, John.
And thank you for that. And I would just say that that's going to have more clarity as we create it. So I appreciate you believing me, but it'll be more than just my verbal piece. There's going to be obviously budgetary processes and language that solidifies that piece.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. All right.
I'm good.
Councilmember Russo.
And I guess, John, just to follow up on conversations we've been having with the administration, I just think it's really important right now because we also have those 5 expiring millages that are happening, right? And so for people to see how the money's being spent from FEMA/JIRR plus fair share and sort of be able to document it for them, I think is just really critically important. Because I know you're telling us, and I appreciate that it's not just the verbal, it's having it on paper, making sure we all see it. But I think the more that we can collectively tell the public, this is how your money's being spent and how infrastructure is the first priority and this is where it's going, will benefit everybody.
Councilman, I think that makes sense. And frankly, I think that's why, the mayor has worked and really prioritized, and you specifically mentioned JIRR, ways to make sure those dollars are going out the door, but also people see how that's working and what the processes are on that. And we need to continue to build support for what we're trying to do with infrastructure. And you only get that collective buy-in if people understand what's happening.
Right.
And so a big part of what we're trying to do, and it includes the establishment of the Infrastructure Advisory Board, right, is that people have some clarity about where these dollars go and how the processes work, and that's going to continue to be a priority, which I think has been borne out by some of the specific things that we've been trying to put in place, but will continue to be a priority of the administration.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention the $500 million bond issuance too, right, as part of that whole infrastructure. And I guess, look, even some of the problems is some of my neighborhoods will say, I don't see any road construction. You'll say, well, you may not see it right in front of you, but it's on this side and this side of your neighborhood. So it is happening right now.
And I think it's one of those things too where pointing to existing communication on some of those pieces, because when there's a plan about, look, these dollars are being spent, it might be that the person didn't see that email or didn't go to the website or didn't see the text. And so continue to work to make sure that that information is disseminated, because there are efforts on our end to certainly do that. But we just need to all kind of work together to make sure that stuff is getting out there and people.
Yeah, and I mean,
see
we'll
what's
we'll
happening.
do our best to do that too. Like, we have newsletters for certain organizations, and I just added specifically in one of them a project that's getting ready to break ground. So let us know also as that develops, so we can help spread that message too. Thank you.
Council members? Well, thank you both for coming. We know that this is has become a multi-step process. I know we all wanted this to go much faster. We do appreciate the mayor's vision on this, and I think it's long overdue to really start focusing on sustainable tourism and uplifting the people that work in this industry that basically employs over 80,000 people across the region. I think anytime we invest and uplift them, we can really create more wealth and equity. And I'm just going to close again with what y'all all know. The council passed a resolution with all authors talking about a sustainable tourism plan, and this needs to happen immediately. This can help guide a fund. And if you have the culture bearers at the table and people of the industry at the table, they're going to help tell us where investment is needed. I'm a firm believer, and I think the mayor is as well, coming from the community, as we all do, that the people in the community can tell us where best to put the money, right, and the investment.
I would definitely agree with that.
And that's the intent of this study. And so I really hope that we see this more formalized in the ordinance that are going to start coming our way in order to finalize them going through. So thank you all for your work on this, and I do thank the mayor for her vision.
Thank you, Council.
With that, do we have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councilmember Giarrusso, seconded by Councilmember Nguyen. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Thank you so much.